You saw the signs, you felt it. Something was off, and you trusted them anyway. Not because you were naive, not because you didn't notice, but because your mind kept giving them the benefit of the doubt. It kept softening what you saw, rewriting it into something easier to believe. And then it happened again. Different person, same pattern, same moment where it hits you. You trusted someone who didn't deserve it. Most people call this bad luck or poor judgment. They tell themselves it won't happen again. But it does, because this isn't random, and it's not about them. The real question is this: why do you keep trusting people who prove you shouldn't? Because this isn't a personality flaw, it's something deeper, something built into how your mind works. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's a reason this keeps happening. Not because you weren't paying attention, not because you didn't see the signs, but because the way your mind decides who to trust isn't built to catch the kind of people who take advantage of it. You thought you had learned. You told yourself it wouldn't happen again. This time, you'd pay attention. You'd notice the red flags. You'd trust your judgment. And at first, you did. Until something small didn't quite add up. A detail that felt off. A moment that didn't sit right. But you explained it away. You told yourself it wasn't a big deal, that you were overthinking, that maybe you were just being too cautious, so you stayed. And slowly, the pattern built. Not all at once, just enough to ignore. Until one moment made it clear you had seen this before. And somehow, you were here again. That's the part that's hard to sit with, because it feels like failure, like you missed something obvious, like you should have known better. But this isn't about being bad at judging people. It's about how your mind handles trust. Because your brain doesn't evaluate people like facts. It evaluates them like stories. And stories can be edited by hope, by familiarity, by the time you've already invested, which is why the pattern repeats. Different person, same outcome. Here's what's actually happening. Your brain makes a decision about someone early, much earlier than you think. Not after months, not after proof, within moments. And once that decision is made, everything else gets filtered through it. If you like them, your brain looks for reasons to confirm it. If something feels off, it gets softened, explained away, minimized. This is what psychologists call the halo effect. One good trait spreads across everything. They're charming, so they must be trustworthy. They understand you, so they must be honest. And once your brain makes that connection, it stops looking as carefully. Not because you're careless, because your brain is trying to be efficient. It would rather be consistent than accurate. And then something else happens. The longer you stay, the harder it becomes to see clearly. Because now you've invested time, energy, emotion, and your brain doesn't like admitting that investment might have been wrong. So instead of updating the judgment, it protects it. It holds on to the original story, even when the evidence changes, which is why the pattern repeats. Not because you didn't see it, but because once you believed in them, your mind started protecting that belief. You remember those moments, not the obvious ones, the small ones, the detail that didn't quite match, the story that shifted slightly, the promise that was made and quietly dropped. You noticed. That's the part most people get wrong. You did see it, but instead of stopping, you explained it. You told yourself it wasn't a big deal, that you were overthinking, that there was probably a reasonable explanation. So you stayed. And those small moments kept stacking, one by one, none of them big enough to act on, but together, forming a pattern you only recognized later, when it was already clear, when the distance was there, when the investment was already made. And that's what makes it so hard to interrupt. Because while you're inside it, it doesn't feel like a pattern. It feels like isolated moments, each one easy to dismiss, each one justifiable. And then there's something even harder to admit. You weren't just trusting them, you were defending them, explaining them, protecting the version of them you believed in, because admitting the truth doesn't just change how you see them, it changes how you see yourself as someone who trusted them. And your mind will avoid that moment for as long as it can, which is why the pattern doesn't just happen once. It repeats, with different people, in different situations, but in the same way. The shift isn't about trusting less. It's about understanding what your trust is responding to. Because most of the time, you're not trusting consistency. You're trusting how someone makes you feel. Warmth, charm, familiarity. And those things can be real and still misleading. Someone can feel good to be around and still be unreliable. That's the difference most people miss. Feeling safe isn't the same as being safe. So the first shift is this: separate the feeling from the pattern. How someone makes you feel is immediate, but what they do reveals itself over time. The second shift is simpler than it sounds. Watch the small things, not the big gestures, not the promises that sound impressive, the small ones, the things that are easy to keep or easy to ignore, because that's where the pattern shows up first. The person who is honest when it costs nothing is far more likely to be honest when it matters. And the one who casually breaks small commitments is showing you something early. And the final shift is the hardest. Stop protecting your first impression. Most people decide who someone is and then defend that decision, even when the evidence changes. But trust isn't something you decide once. It's something you update constantly. Because the moment you start updating your judgment, instead of protecting it, the pattern breaks. Not because you trust less, but because you start trusting accurately. There's a hard part in seeing this clearly, because it means looking back and realizing you saw more than you admitted. The signs were there. The moments were there. You noticed. You just didn't let yourself fully believe it. Not because you were blind, because you were human, because your mind was doing exactly what it was built to do. Protect the story it had already chosen. Avoid the cost of being wrong. Hold on to what felt right, a little longer than it should have. That isn't weakness, it's default. And the people who took advantage of it didn't have to be special. They just had to exist inside that gap between what you saw and what you allowed yourself to conclude. But understanding this changes something. Not everything, but enough. It doesn't make you cynical. It doesn't make you distrust everyone. It makes you precise. Because real trust isn't built on how something feels. It's built on what repeats, on patterns, on consistency, especially when nothing is at stake. And the moment you start paying attention to that, the pattern breaks. Not because people change, but because you do. You weren't wrong to trust. You were using a mind that does exactly what it's designed to do. Find reasons to believe in people. Protect the story it chose. Avoid the cost of being wrong. That isn't a flaw, it's the default. What changes from here isn't suspicion. It isn't building walls. It's something more precise. It's paying attention to what repeats instead of what feels right. Watching small commitments instead of grand gestures. Updating your judgment instead of protecting it. Because trust, when it's placed accurately, doesn't just feel safer, it feels real. You don't need to trust less. You need to trust better. And once you understand the pattern, you stop repeating it. If this explains something you've lived through but never been able to name, tell me in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know what resonated. To continue this understanding, watch the next video here. And to understand human behavior at a deeper level, subscribe to Decoded Way.